Hello everyone, and welcome to the Solo Gamers Club. Tonight we're going to learn how to set up and play Global War, World War II Worldwide, 1939 to 1945 by White Dog Games. Global War is a strategic level solo game where we'll take on the roles of the big three, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, as we direct the Allied efforts to push back the Axis forces of Germany, Italy, and Japan, and win World War II, all in the space of a few hours. We'll begin with an overview of the game's components, and we'll follow that up with a brief outline of the rules. Then we'll play through a few turns to find out how the game works. Finally, I'll return with my thoughts about the game and provide some insight into its fun factor. So, let's get started. We'll begin with the map. The map is a depiction of the world as it existed in the late 1930s, and it's divided into 6 types of boxes. We have 6 fronts labeled A through F, where the majority of the action will take place. There's 4 icon boxes, 10 region boxes, and 11 holding boxes. The fronts are divided into 2 theaters of 3 locations each: the European Theater and the Pacific Theater. These fronts include the Eastern Front, Western Front, and the Mediterranean Front in Europe, and China, Southeast Asia, and South Pacific theaters in the Pacific. Icon boxes include French North Africa, the Belgian Congo, South Africa, and the Dutch East Indies. Region boxes are marked with telegram symbols, and they represent areas outside of the 6 major fronts where significant military and political conflicts also took place. Finally, we have holding boxes, and they're marked with green flags. And these are locations where we'll store tiles that are in use but not necessarily in play at the moment. The playing pieces are square tiles that represent a variety of items, ranging from armies, ships, planes, political events, and major cities. The pieces are set up on a card known as the counter tray. The counter tray will help the player keep things organized during play. To set up the counter tray, we simply find the tokens and place them on the spaces provided. As an example, we have a location here for pro-Axis miners. So we'll put the Romania, Finland, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Axis Spain tokens in that location. And this makes it easy for us during play to locate tiles that we need to introduce into the game without having to search through a bag of tokens. Once all the tokens have been organized on the counter tray, we're going to consult the 1939 campaign scenario sheet and set up the counters according to steps 1 through 9. Step 1 is to locate the green turn chits. There's 3 of them. We're going to turn them face down and randomize them, and they're going to go on the calendar boxes for turns 1, 2, and 3. So we've located the 3 green turn chits, and we're supposed to turn those over and randomize them. However, there is a problem. You'll notice that the reverse side of those 3 tokens have different symbols on them. So eventually you would know that one of these is going to be that token because of the reverse side. So instead of placing them on the calendar track, what I'm going to do is place them into a cup, and we'll draw them randomly for the first 3 turns. This way we won't have any information as to what the actual front side will contain. Next up, we're supposed to set aside the Barbarossa and Pearl Harbor backed chit tokens. And we'll place those probably on the calendar, I think, for easy place to remember where they are. And then the other 23 tan chits will go into a draw cup. So we place those other chits into a draw cup, and that's going to be our action tokens for the game. Step 2 of the setup is our army setup, and we're going to be using the reserve boxes at the top of the counter tray, A through F. And we're going to place the following forces, beginning with front A reserves. We'll place all the German airplane units, which include a Messerschmitt Bf 109, Junkers 88, Heinkel 111, and Dorner 17, plus the Goering and 1 Blitz token. So we place those forces in front A. Front B is next. We'll place German Army Group North, Army Group Center, Army Group South, and the Romanian Army, and 1 Blitz token. And those tokens go into box B. Front C reserves include the German Afrika Korps, the Italian 5th, and 1 Blitz token. And those tokens go on box C, the Mediterranean front. We'll shift to front D, and we're going to place the Japanese Wang and Chinese Communist Party Red Armies and a Blitz token in that box. And those tokens go into the China Theater. Next up is front E, and that'll be the Japanese 15th, 28th, Burmese, and Indian armies, and a Blitz token. And those tokens go into box E, the Southeast Asia Theater. Finally, we have front F, and that's going to include the Japanese 14th, 18th, 31st, and 32nd armies, along with the Blitz token. Then we place the following forces on the map in the designated areas, beginning with front A. And we're going to stack these tokens in the order listed on the counter: 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8. That'll include the Polish Army, Danish, Norwegian, Dutch, Belgian, and French armies. And those will go into the Western Front. In box B, we're going to place the Berlin counter. Then in box C on the map, that's the Mediterranean Front, we're going to place the Italy neutral counter, along with the Italian capital, CCNN, Coal Army, and the 10th Army. Italy begins neutral. Then on front D, we're going to place the Japanese units, NCAA, CCAA, and the Manchukuo Army. In front E, we're going to place the Japan neutral token. And finally, in front F, we're going to place the Japan neutral token along with the Tokyo token. Then we're going to place 11 city tiles with their blue sky side up, and we'll place all of those in the high morale box. And those city tokens are going to be very important to us. If a number of those end up moving to low morale, we have a very good chance of losing the game. So it's important for us to remain high morale in these cities, in particular the US and Soviet cities. Then we're going to place 2 partisans in the partisans pool. You'll notice that that's in one of those green flag boxes, and those are holding boxes. And then on front C, we're going to place the Malta besieged token in that partisans box. Now, Malta is extremely important to the Allies on the Mediterranean front. We'll learn more about that later. Then on the omnibus markers track, we're going to place the millions of dollars and cannon meat tokens on space 8. The U.S. aid to China marker goes on box 5. And the Manhattan Project and Naval Actions tokens will go on 0. The millions of dollars token represents our economic reserves that we have that we can spend for game actions. The Soviet cannon meat token represents the 20 million Russian conscripts that were employed into the Red Army. And that, combined with primarily the U.S. economy, is going to be how we're going to defeat the Axis powers. The U.S. aid to China marker represents pre-war U.S. aid to the nationalist Chinese army, not the communist Chinese. And finally, the Manhattan Project and Naval Actions tokens are used to record the number of naval actions that the U.S. will have available to it in the Pacific, and the Manhattan Project will be its progress towards achieving the atomic bomb technology. In the midway box, we're going to place the Japanese aircraft carriers Akagi, Suikaku, and Hiru. In the Philippine Sea, we're going to place the battleship Congo, the light carrier Zuiho, and the Zero counter. And then in the Coral Sea, we're going to place the cruiser Aoba and Tanaka's destroyers. Now, these naval tokens have two sides. You have the red dot on one side and a white dot on the other. All of these are going to begin with their red dot sides, and the game designer calls those meatballs. The remaining Japanese ships will be placed in the Kore Japan naval holding box. And those will also start with their meatball side up. Then we're going to place the British flagged and French flagged convoy markers in the available convoys holding box. The Norwegian convoy marker goes into the Norway holding box. And then we're going to place the German surface raider, the Admiral Graf Spee, into the German U-boats holding box. In addition to the Graf Spee, we also place a U-boat in the U-boats box. In the Allied leadership boxes, we're going to place Stalin and Chamberlain. The Roosevelt token will begin the game on the omnibus track on box 5. Then we're going to place the Ruhrgebiet economic token in the box provided. That represents the Ruhr area of Germany, which was their main industrial production area within the Reich. And we'll do the same for Japan by placing the Osaka and Nagoya economic token in the box provided. That is the Japanese Center of Industrial Production on Honshu. And then we're going to place 3 Lend-Lease tokens in the U.S. East Coast, and these are identified with green stars. And they consist of Destroyer Deal, Liberty ships, and Jeeps and trucks. Those tokens will allow us to inject capital into our economies, but at a potential risk in the re-election of Roosevelt as the president. Soviet policy begins the game in the neutral box. Then from the counter tray, we're going to place 15 U.S. aircraft carrier units into a draw cup. And this will serve as our economic engine in the Pacific. So we place all of those tokens in a draw cup, just as we did with the Turnshits. We'll place the Burma Road open token in the Burma Road box, and that indicates that supplies can be transferred to the nationalist Chinese through India and into China to aid them in their fight against Japan. The Burma Road may be open or closed. Begins the game open. We'll place the Sino Army with the pro-USSR side up into that box. St. King box. Then we're going to place the Finnish army with its Velaruha side up in the Finland box. And in the Hawaii holding box, we'll place the U.S. Marines and Admiral Spruance tokens. Then in the Belgian Congo, we're going to place the pro-Belgian Colonial Administration token in the Belgian Congo. You'll notice a nuclear symbol next to that. That is one of the primary locations that the U.S. Manhattan Project will be getting its nuclear material from to eventually build the atomic bomb. In a similar fashion, in South Africa, we're going to place the pro-UN Smuts token in South Africa. The game is now set and we're ready to play. Now I know what you're saying to yourself. You're saying, wow, all these counters and stuff, how am I going to make sense out of this? Well, fortunately, this game is very procedural, and we go through a sequence of play step by step, and it makes sense after we understand what's happening. Our game opens with the fall of 1939, and that is turn 1. Japan has been waging war against China since 1931 in the China Theater, and Germany has just launched its attack against Poland, which is going to set off the war. The other fronts, Eastern Front, Mediterranean Front, Southeast Asian Front, and South Pacific fronts are currently neutral for the moment. I think the easiest way to teach this game is to actually play through a turn. And as we're doing that, I will introduce you to the different various counters and what the numbers on those counters mean. Consulting our sequence of play, we begin with step A, and that's the chit draw phase. We're going to, in this case, randomly draw one of the 3 green chits that we have. And we're going to place that on the calendar track for turn 1. So here is our initial draw. We've drawn token number 1. Let's take a look at that token more closely. Now the token includes various pieces of information. In the middle of the token we have a number with a white circle. That just tells us that that's chit number 1, and it can either have a white, yellow, or red background, and those will have various functions during the game. In the upper left-hand corner, we have the United Nations symbol. In this game, the designer refers to what I call the Allies as the UN. I'm an old school person, so I will probably be calling the Allies the Allies. In the upper right-hand corner, we have a South African flag, and we're going to see what that function has to do with South Africa. In the lower left, we have a number with a large letter, and that tells us that there are going to be 3 Axis attacks on front A. Finally, in the lower right-hand corner, we've got a letter and a circle. Those are advanced rules, and we won't be using those during this playthrough. The advanced rules were made available online at White Dog Games, and you can print those out. And these would have various random event functions during play if you're using the advanced rules. So now we're going to move on to step B, and that's the turn start phase. And we place the turn chit that we just drew on the calendar as we did. The next step is to deploy units from the calendar turn box. If there were any units here, they would be deployed to the map or the holding boxes. There are none on turn 1. Then we would examine that calendar box and see if there were any calendar events. There are none. Those would be highlighted in red as you see during early 1940 or late 1940. The next step is to play chit-based events which were found on the turn chits. In this case we have one that is the South African flag, and we'll see what that has to do with this turn. We'll find those in the rules on section 5.4. And in the rules that reads, South Africa, if the turn chit has South Africa's flag on it, chit number 1, roll a die. On a 6, its racist government pulls South Africa out of the war against Hitler. Flip the South Africa tile to its neutral side. Otherwise, Jan Christian Smuts preserves South Africa's alliance with Britain, and there is no game effect. All right, let's make the roll. And the roll is a 3. So, South Africa will maintain its alliance with the British Empire. Step C now is the evening telegraph phase. And this is going to be our random events phase that will occur. We're going to roll a die and we're going to add the current turn number from the calendar track and read that entry on the evening telegraph. Here's the roll. We rolled a 6 plus 1 for our current turn is 7. So we're going to read the entry for 7 on the telegraph. Now on the evening telegraph chart, we have 3 columns: a military events column, a political events column, and a commandos column. Reading the entry for 7 to 8, we have Wavell. So we're going to place the military event token from the military events display, and we'll put that on the Wavell location of the box. Now you'll notice that these are in blue and red text. If it's blue text, it'll favor the Allies. If it's red text, it will favor the Axis powers. So we're going to place that event token on Wavell, General Wavell. It's going to give a +1 DRM to all attacks against Italian armies. All right, so we'll place that there as a reminder. Now, consulting the Evening Telegraph again, we'll look under the political events column that says Sinkiang. So we'll look into the rule book, and for Sinkiang, it says if the Sinkiang tile is on its pro-USSR side, flip it to its pro-Japan side. It will then hurt the war in China with its -1 DRM. So that will be flipped to its pro-Japan side, and then that -1 modifier will kick in for all attacks on front D. We move on now to step D, and that's the Axis powers attack phase. And we're going to be deploying Axis armies based upon what the turn chit says, in this case 3A. So there's going to be a total of 3 Axis attacks against front A, which is the Western Front. Now how this works is, if we choose to do nothing, the Axis attacks are going to eliminate 1 Allied army within that front. So as an example, if we chose to do nothing and let Germany launch the attack on Poland, that's going to be a victory for them, and that token would be turned over to its reduced side for Poland. If another attack happens, it would remove the token, and then the third attack would attack Denmark, and it would remove that token, flipping it to the Norway side. So we'll have to see what we want to do here to try to help out our allies on the Western Front. You'll notice on the token that they have the Polish flag, and then there's a large number 3 with a $1 in parentheses. Now if we choose to try to support the Poles, it will cost us $1. Now if we choose to pay the cost to support this, these are known as prop units, by the way, and they prop up that front. So if we decide to pay that cost, the Axis will have to actually make a die roll to attempt to remove this rather than getting the automatic win. And they would have to roll a number higher than the value listed on the counter. So in this case, if we pay the $1, the Axis will have to use one of their 3 attacks, and they would have to roll a 4 or greater to flip the Polish army. Now this does not represent direct aid from the Royal Navy sailing into the Baltic and delivering supplies in Danzig. This would represent pre-war allocations that the Polish would use in the defense of their country. So that's what this would represent. So I think as the Allied player, we're going to spend $1 to try to prop that unit. So we're going to lower our millions of dollars token down to 7, and we're going to prop up that Polish army. So the Axis will use one of their 3 attacks on that front, and we'll make the roll. And they rolled a 4, and that is higher than the 3. That is going to spend that Polish army, and it will be on the reduced side of the Polish army. Now we have the same decision to make, but this time it only has a strength of 2. So I don't think we're going to spend any more dollars on the defense of Poland. So their second attack would destroy that Polish army, and Germany has conquered Poland. Their third attack on the front is going to be directed against Denmark. The Danish army only has a strength of 1, and it would cost us $1 to prop that up, and I don't think we'll do that. So the Axis attack will go through, capturing Denmark. And that will be the 3 Axis attacks on the front. That completes step D, the Axis powers attack phase. We move on to E, the economic warfare phase. And I think this is one of the more interesting mechanics that the game's designer developed. And this will be the primary method by which the Allies will gain economic points that they can spend for game functions. You'll notice on the map that there are 7 circle areas in the world's oceans, and they each have a number and possibly a letter designation in them. We're going to assign our available convoys, and we're going to attempt to outwit the German U-boats and surface raiders and try to get economic points for the Allies. Now we'll examine the German U-boats table, and this will be the table that the Axis are going to roll against using 2d6, and this will determine where the Axis U-boats and surface raiders are going to deploy to. So we have to take a look at this. There's along the left side of the table is the dice roll, and then there's several columns ranging 1 to 4. This will be the number of U-boats and or surface raiders that are available to the Axis. In this case, there are 2. We have 1 U-boat and the Admiral Graf Spee surface raider. So they'll be rolling on that 2 U-boats column. If we look at that now, this has the normal dispersion for 2d6. So the most common results will be 6, 7, and 8, which will be in Zone 4 and Zone 3. Now the numbers in those boxes determine how many economic points we're going to gain if we can outwit the U-boats and surface raiders. So obviously the boxes 4 and 3 are going to be the more popular, but they'll also be the ones that the U-boats will most likely deploy to. So we have to attempt to outwit these surface raiders and U-boats. And I think we're going to deploy the British convoy into the North Sea area. That'll be the 2A location. And the French convoy I'm going to deploy into the 2B location. Next, we're going to make a 2d6 roll for the Axis, and we'll see where their U-boats and surface raiders will deploy to. And here's their roll. And they've rolled a 5. So consulting the table, cross-referencing 5 with 2 U-boats, they're going to deploy into the boxes 4 and 3. Now, surface raiders always deploy to the highest valued target. So the Graf Spee is going to go into the 4 box, and the U-boats will go into the 3 box. Now, in this stage of the game, we have not formed convoys or anything, so we have no anti-submarine warfare ability. Later in the game, we will have the ability to fight back against surface raiders and U-boats. But at this time, we don't. So what we do is we examine each of the locations, and if there is ever a location where there is a U-boat and a convoy, that is going to stop us from gaining any economic gains from that location. If there are ever two U-boats or surface raiders in the same area, it's going to sink the convoy. Then it will go back to the U.S. East Coast box where we'll have to rebuild it. But in this case, we managed to outwit the Axis surface raiders and U-boats. So we're going to gain 2 points for the North Sea and 2 points for the Indian Ocean. So that's going to raise our economic total by 4. So we raise our millions of dollars token from 7 up to 11. Now during this step, we're able to employ some of our Allied leaders from our leadership pool. We have Chamberlain and we have Stalin. Chamberlain has no function in the game. He wasn't a very effective leader. Once Churchill gets online, we'll be able to have some extra options for Churchill. For right now, though, we have Stalin, and he can be used in several methods. The choices for Stalin are shock armies, central headquarters, military commissariats, and Great Patriotic War. The only viable action for him this early in the game is his shock army's ability, and that allows us to make an attack versus an army on fronts B and D, Finland, Xinjiang, or the Caucasus, even if neutral. We're going to roll 2 dice and take the higher result. And I think we're going to employ his ability in Xinjiang. And that's going to allow him to roll 2 dice and attempt to defeat the pro-Japanese unit that is in that location. Right now, that formation is giving a -1 modifier to any Allied attacks in the Chinese theater. So we'll see if we can use Stalin to open that front up a bit. So he's going to use 2 dice, and we'll take the higher result of the 2, and we're attempting to get higher than a 2 to flip that army. And he's successful. He's got a 4. So we're able to flip that pro-Japanese army back to the pro-USSR army, and then Stalin is used, and we'll put him back on the display in the used condition. Another option the Allies have is to give Lend-Lease assistance to the Allies. You'll see that we have these 3 green star tokens in the U.S. East Coast box. Once per turn, we can spend one of those to get a benefit for the Allies. Now, the U.S. is reluctant to give any aid to the European conflict at this point. So any use of these tokens can have an effect on the 1940 presidential election, which will determine whether Roosevelt will be elected for his 3rd term or not. So if we use these, the Roosevelt token will move down the omnibus track marker by 1. And then eventually we're going to be making a die roll to determine if he is elected or not. So we have to use these sparingly. Now the Jeeps and Trucks token, we can cash that in for $3, $3 million, and add it to the treasury. Then we would flip that tile to its aid to Russia side, which can be used later. The other option is Liberty ships. We can place 2 U.S. convoy units in the East Coast box, and those would be available for purchase at $2 each. Or we have the destroyer deal. Randomly remove 1 U.S. carrier from the carrier cup, and then we would take 1 existing U-boat from the map and place it on the calendar as many turns ahead as the strength of the carrier which we draw. So those would be our options, but any use of those tokens prior to turn 3 can have an effect on the election. Right now we have $11 million in our treasury, so I don't think at this time we're going to utilize any of these tokens. That completes the economic warfare phase, and we'll move on to the UN attack phase. And this allows us to spend our economic reserves in making attacks against the Axis forces. Now, the Eastern Front and the Mediterranean Front are currently neutral, so we can't make any attacks there. The Western Front, there are no Axis armies there, just our prop units. So the only viable theater that we can really make any attacks in is in China. So for the cost of $1 million, we can launch an attack against Axis armies. And the same condition applies. We need to roll higher than the value of the unit. Now in this game, 1s are always fails and 6s are always successes, regardless of dice roll modifiers. Now we also have the ability to attack Axis surface raiders. For the cost of $1 million, we can attempt to sink those surface raiders. Now we have the Admiral Graf Spee at sea, so we can attempt to sink him. We'd need a result of 4 or greater. So I think we'll do that. We're going to spend $1 million to activate the Royal Navy, and they'll see if they can hunt for the Admiral Graf Spee. So we'll lower our economic track from 11 down to 10, and we'll roll a die and see if we can sink this raider. Here's the roll. Roll is a 1. We failed. They couldn't find him. We'll try it again. I think we'll spend another million, moving us down from 10 to 9, and we'll try another roll. That time we're successful. We've got a 5. That is going to sink the Admiral Graf Spee, which is great. I think we'll turn our attention to the Chinese theater, and we'll attempt to send some of these Japanese armies back to the counter tray. So we're going to spend $1 million, moving us down from 9 to 8, and we'll make an attack against this NCAA army. We need to get a 4 or greater. And we are unsuccessful. We also have another economic track we can use, and that's the U.S. aid to China track. This track represents U.S. aid to China prior to the commencement of the war. So that was a built-up U.S. aid to China. And once this starts out at 5, once it gets to 0, it's gone forever. It's a limited supply to it. So we'll spend 1 point of the U.S. aid to China and try again. We're looking for a 4 or greater. And we failed. We'll try another one. That time we're successful. We have a 5. So that is going to send this NCAA army back to the force pool. So we'll place that NCAA army back onto the display for Theater D, the Chinese theater. So we'll place that token back into Theater D, the Chinese theater. And that's how this works. We're basically attempting to forestall the Axis from gaining a blitz token. And they gain a blitz token whenever a 6th army is deployed into a theater. When that happens, it's going to have a direct effect on our morale. And that is one of the mechanisms by which we can lose the game. So we always have to be sensitive to that. Now, we still have some ability in the U.S. aid to China track, so I think we're going to spend 1 more point from there, and we're going to attempt to do another attack, this time on the CCAA army. Here's the roll. We rolled a 1. That is a failure. Well, I think we'll try 1 more. We're going to spend 1 more point, moving it down to 1, and we'll see if we can get lucky. And we are successful. We've got a 5. It's going to move that army back to the counter tree. Now you'll notice that there is 1 Japanese army remaining, and that's the Manchukuo army, Manchuria. Now this has a special symbol on there, and that's the capital symbol. Now we cannot attack that army unless it is by the use of what's called a downfall. And we'll get into that later in the playthrough. But in order to engineer a downfall, there's several things that we need to, prerequisites that we need to meet before we can do that. So the Manchukuo army we can't attack because that is a capital. It's got the capital symbol on there. And so I think that's all of the actions we're going to take for the UN attack phase. Next up would be phase G, and that's turning the tide. And that's where we would attempt to place pink strategy tiles when possible. That goes back to what I was discussing before about downfalls, where we attempt to collapse a theater and close it off for the rest of the game. Now there's many prerequisites for that. As an example, the China theater cannot really be closed until the USSR is at war with Japan. Each theater has its own little nuances, but in this case, the Chinese theater can't really be closed until Russia enters the war against Japan. All we can do is attempt to beat back the Japanese threats in that area and try to prevent them gaining a blitz. Next up is Phase H, and that's the Pacific Naval Phase. Now, this will not take place if Japan is neutral or the Dutch East Indies are still Dutch controlled, which is what they are currently. So we're going to skip that, but in this phase, the U.S. is going to attempt to use its carrier forces to beat back the Japanese naval units that are deployed into the various ocean spaces that we have in the Pacific, namely Midway, Philippine Sea, and Coral Sea. And in my opinion, this is also one of the more interesting mechanisms that the designer has created. This definitely gives you a different feel in the Pacific as opposed to the European theater. And I think he has simulated this very, very well with the mechanics that he has devised to give you the feel of that wide-ranging naval conflict in the Pacific. And now we move on to step I, and that's the industrial phase. That allows us to build partisans, reinforce Malta, build convoys, do naval production, build over the hump tile, which would operate with the Burma Road, build a place known as Ricks Place, build atomic bombs, and then check for undefeated commandos. That would be the steps that we would undertake in that phase. We currently have a total of $8 million left on the marker track, and I think we're going to spend some of that to reinforce some areas around the board. One of the most important occurs in the Mediterranean front. Let's zoom down there. In the Mediterranean front, we have this Malta besieged counter. Now that represents that Malta is in need of reinforcements. It doesn't mean that it's besieged at this point. But we can spend $2 million to flip that from its besieged side to its normal side. Malta is very important because it allows us to roll 2 dice when we're attempting to operate in the Mediterranean front, and that's very powerful. So we're going to spend the $2 million and move that Malta marker to its full strength side. And that's going to move us down to $6 million. Another thing we can do is build something known as Ricks Place. And that refers back to the famous movie of 1942 with Humphrey Bogart, Casablanca. And we're able to build that for $2 million. That gives us a positive modifier when dealing in French North Africa. So since we have the wherewithal, we are going to spend $2 million and purchase Ricks Place. That leaves us with $4 million in our treasury. So that's going to finish the phase I industrial phase. We'll move on to J, and that's the turn end phase. During this phase, the Allies can bank some of their economy, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to save those $4 million that we have on the track, and we'll just leave it where it is. Any active military events are now expired, so we'll move that token back to the display here for redeployment next turn. Then we take care of our naval reset. All U-boats on the map, including German and Argentine surface raiders, are returned to the U-boats box. So that U-boat will move back to the U-boats box. And then at the same time, all of our available convoys will be moved back to the available convoys box. So we'll move those back. And that is the naval reset portion of the turn. And that will bring the turn to a close, and we would restart, starting with phase A on the sequence of play, the chit draw phase, and we would play through another round exactly as we did in this first round. Now during this introductory video, I was only able to show you some of the very basic elements of the game. There's many more levers and switches that can get pulled in this game as you play through. And I'm hoping that this was enough to have the viewers decide if this is a game for them, and they might be interested in this, and that was the purpose of the video. So now we'll come back and I'll give you my thoughts on the game. Well, I can tell you this, as a fan of history and particularly World War II, this game really encapsulates the conflict extremely well. You feel like you're making the decisions that the big three would have made during the conflict. And there's so much more to this that I didn't get into because of the limited aspects of just playing one turn. But the decision making in this really gives the player an excellent view of what the leaders were going through and the decisions that they had to make in their attempt to defeat the Axis in this war. So I would definitely recommend this game for anyone that's interested in World War II. And I think it really is a masterfully designed game where it brings all of these elements of the conflict into a very playable and manageable footprint. You really feel like you're at the desk of, Churchill or Roosevelt when you're making these decisions. And I'm sure that a lot of this that is contained in the game were things they struggled over. You have limited resources, and how do you use these best to defeat the Axis powers? There's many elements that we never got into in this short playthrough. There's Allied bombing of Germany and Japan, partisan activity, the U.S. naval battles against Japan in the Pacific, and just wonderful simulation of the choices that the Allied powers had to make during 1939 to 1945. So this game would definitely be a recommendation for anyone interested in the period. And I think it would also prove to be an excellent gateway into wargaming in general. It gives you a good basis for if you'd like to get into that aspect of gaming. And it's a stepping stone towards other games that might be more complex than this. But this really, I think, it's what the designer intended he was able to accomplish. And I think it's excellent. So I think that's going to wrap this video up. My intent was to just give you a basic overview of the game and to help you decide if this is something that you might want to have in your collection. I can definitely do a more extensive playthrough of the game if that's something that the viewers might enjoy. And I'm definitely willing to bring this back to the channel. I think it's a fantastic design, and I'm actually very enjoyable for me to bring this to you. It's a lot of fun. So until next time, this is Keith from the Solo Gamers Club, wishing everyone a pleasant evening and a good night.